Hello and welcome to the Weekend Spread Conference Previews. Uh, if you're unfamiliar with Weekend Spread, this is the Schooner Pod's general college football podcast. I'm Bobby Howard. With me today, we've got the captain sailing on in to break down the ACC, a conference that has rapidly become one of the more geographically confused ones. Um, big big stuff happening for the ACC, not happening to the ACC off the field. It's been a weird year, evidenced by Cal, Stanford, and SMU coming into town, but we're gonna try to keep it mostly on the field. But I gotta start, Blake. You're broadcasting live from ACC country
I
down
was
in
about to
Dallas.
say, yep.
Stone's relatively close to
About a
SMU.
mile away, about a
Yeah,
mile away from ACC country, a area that has always been dominated by the Big 12 or even SEC when it comes to fan bases, but the SMU, I'll say, has leaned into it hard. There's billboards all around the city about them joining the ACC. I think even near campus, I don't know if it's still there, but they had a giant ACC flag flying at some point, and the construction of the stadium probably shows that they're leaning into it like big time. Like this is a big time thing for them.
so needless to say, they're pretty pumped about it. That's good to hear. I mean, I obviously SMU's been eager about it. They've shelled out a ton of money to not make any money. So it's an interesting move. We'll see how it pans out for them. We'll talk about their play on the field uh, a little bit later. But let's dive into some of the big storylines. We're going to go through some of the biggest storylines of the ACC, and then wrap up with some of our sort of gambling predictions, because this is typically a gambling show. And what better way to start than with the previous ACC champion, the Florida State Seminoles. So the Noles, undefeated last year, well, until the bowl game, missed out on the college football playoff, quite notably. A lot of players out. So I got to ask, like, can FSU maintain last year's success?
I think with the strength of this league, they can, in the sense that like they'll be easily competing. Like I think there's probably three teams here at the top that are actually competing to win the ACC championship, and they're definitely one of them. But this has the feeling a little bit, Bobby, and you kind of called it last year, of like the TCU team that just came off of like a miracle run, and you have brand new players all across the board, like offense, defense is sprinkled. Like basically everybody went to the draft, and now they've had to replace that. And when you look at this roster, there's a whole bunch of guys that you're like, oh, DJU comes in for Jordan Travis. Like DJU feels about like 80% of what Jordan Travis is, and you kind of do that across the entire roster, and you end up at this weird place where you're like, yeah, they could still be good. Like they've replaced a lot, but they just feel like they're at 80% of last year's potential. It doesn't feel like it is as magical of a roster. Like they've just kind of had to, like, Florida State's whole thing has been like recruit pretty well, but then like slap together heavy in the transfer portal, which they have done again. But they had a dream class last year. Like Jordan Travis was a guy that was there forever. Keon Coleman was one of the best receivers like in the nation, and like got high first round draft pick. Gerard Verse like was incredible on like their defensive line. Like was able to get him from Albany, and so they had like kind of this really big run of just like it seems like generation guys that they were able to pull out of the portal, plus like some of their recruits. I just feel like that formula is really hard to like reproduce on a year to year basis, especially after a year like last year.
Yeah, and I mean, on some scale, it's just really hard. Like you said, it's hard to reproduce, and you can't just think that they're going to slot in and be fine. I mean, look at TCU last year, for example. And I'm not trying to dog on your frogs here,
No, it's
but that whole thing, it was like, oh, you just plug and play, we're going to be fine, and it just wasn't quite the same thing. And DJU, as we know, I feel like I was really hyped about him at Oregon State. I feel like he's not that great.
he just
I'm
did
a
like exceptionally average there. Like
Yeah.
if everything would have stayed the same at Oregon State and it was him and Aiden Childs like going into the spring, it felt more like a Dylan Gabriel, like Jackson Arnold situation at OU, where people were like, "Hey, Dylan Gabriel, like, please get out. Like, we have this young guy behind us that, like, although you're a really decent like college quarterback, like, we have a guy with a higher ceiling." And so, like, that's how I feel about DJU. It's like I think we've seen a ceiling. Like Oregon State last year, he kind of cut down on the turnovers, was a little bit better. Like he showed kind of his explosiveness in the run game a little bit, but he is what he is. I think he's a pretty good quarterback. Like he's a good one to replace Jordan Travis, but like I said, he's kind of about 80% of the way there. Like just doesn't feel like the perfect replacement for him.
Right. And I mean, I feel like Travis is, especially when he was healthy, that's a Heisman level type of guy. He's damn good. And, things really fell apart. So the quarterback position really, obviously year to year, everything's different, but it's of utmost importance. And, losing that safety blanket in Keon Coleman, I mean, that's just devastating. That's going to be a real big issue for Florida State. So I'll put it this way. I feel like Florida State's program trajectory is up, but I feel like maybe people are a little too high on the Noles this season.
Yeah, and they
Go ahead.
can capitalize definitely on this league. Like I don't think this league has like an unbeatable team here that like when you look at the other top two that we're going to talk about, it's not like they are some unbeatable force that is like a Georgia or something that is truly reloading each year. It's like Florida State easily could win this league and is probably like even if they don't win the league could easily end up in the playoff, which I think definitely like the good thing about Florida State is they lost last year on kind of their dream season, but how far would they have gone without Jordan Travis? Like, we don't know, but probably they would have lost in the semifinal. They'll get the benefit of the doubt here. I feel like if they are on the bubble for the 12 team, I feel like this committee is going to do them a favor if they're healthy and actually put them in.
Yeah, as they deserve it. They
Yeah.
deserve at least a 12-team invite if they can keep it kind of close. Schedule not too hard, I would say overall. Non-con is, really kind of plugged up with your standard Florida, Notre Dame, and then, a bunch of scrubs. I think Notre Dame Stadium is going to be really difficult for them. But other than that, you get Florida at home. Miami at Hard Rock Stadium, not a difficult place to play in at all. We saw what happened the last time the Noles were there. Like,
yeah, I was like, it's going to be packed with Florida State fans, not Miami.
yeah, no, like that's not a concern there. Miami probably one of the tougher teams on their schedule, and then Clemson at home, who I think they can handle, and we'll get to talking about the Tigers here in a bit. But overall, I think it's a manageable schedule. And look, hey, this is a team we'll get to see right out the bat with the Week 0 Dublin game against Georgia Tech. Why? It's my biggest question. Why did they do this? Why
I love the Dublin game, but I'm tired of these Week 0 conference matchups. Like I go back to a few years ago when we had who was it Northwestern and Nebraska like head off, and I hate the early conference matchups because they actually do matter. It's like when you look at Florida State's non-conference schedule, it's like even if you drop Notre Dame, even if you drop Florida, you're totally fine when it comes to it. I just hate Week 0 that you're like the pressure is put on for an actual must-win game, and a game I think like Georgia Tech honestly like could be pretty feisty in. Like if you face Georgia Tech at Georgia Tech like Week 7, you're cleaning them up. But I feel like feisty, like just coming out feisty in Week 0, like on the like in a neutral site that is so far away, it kind of makes it a bigger game than it actually is.
I mean, we've seen weird stuff happen in those, Dublin games. Northwestern beat Nebraska, but didn't win a single game. Didn't win a single game on American soil, or might have been a single conference game, or it might have been.
They went 1-11. I think they went 1-11. I think they went 1-11.
So they didn't win anything on U.S. soil, but they won in Dublin. That was basically the beginning of the end of. That was just the end of Scott Frost. He was the dead man walking after that. So we'll see how this turns out. I think this whole season for Florida State will be really telling of where they are as a program. I'm excited for it. So by the way, we got a little comment here from Mike G saying Clemson's going to upset Georgia. So we're going to go ahead and skip line, bring up those Tigers right there. So Clemson to me is, I think, a very interesting case. As we all know, Dabo has not adapted to the new world of college football. I would say has not adapted well. He just hasn't adapted. NIL isn't like a massive deal, but overall, the portal is non-existent. They have taken 0 people in general. They have done a good job of keeping players in, but nobody's left. They have had a clear, sharp decline in quality of team. Like they are not competing for national championships like they used to in that run. So, like, I got to ask, is the Clemson era over? Or is there another last gasp here?
I don't really think there's a last gasp. The problem is when you think of the great Clemson teams, you think of great, like, really what they had was, like, they've always had an outstanding defense. They still have a very outstanding defense, even though Brent Venables went to OU. But the X factor of it was they had elite quarterback play and elite wide receiver play, and they really haven't had anything since. Like, Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, insane quarterbacks. We haven't found anything close. Like, DJU didn't live up to the hype. Cade Klubnik last year, who's going to be starting this year, was very disappointing in his first year. And then when you look at the wide receiver room, it's like they had guys like Sammy Watkins and like some of those big name NFL receivers in there that they always had, it seemed like, one. And even when they didn't, they had like Hunter Renfrow, who was like one of the best college slot receivers that I've ever seen. They just don't have that anymore. Like, the thing about Clemson is they're always going to be pretty good in the ACC because they have a great defense. Their offense, really, they're still like, they develop the line really well. They can always run the ball. It's just the difference maker of them being like, okay, we're competing for an ACC championship because we have good defense, good line. We can still run the ball, keep games close, win at the end, is kind of that is not enough to beat those Ohio States, those Georgias, those elite Big Ten and SEC programs. So is the era over? Yes, because they haven't been able to find that wide receiver position. They haven't been able to find that quarterback position. But I do think, like, Clemson's always going to be relevant. Like, the one thing Dabo, he doesn't do well is the portal, but he does really good recruiting. Like, they still get great recruiting classes. It seems like they still hit on a lot of guys where it's like, wow, they have surprising depth for positions they're taking no transfer portal players with. Like, even this year, when I look at the wide receiver room, it's like they don't have a guy, but they have a lot of guys that are still pretty good. So Clemson, like, they're never going to fall off. Like, even last year when they started the season and they're just like racking up the losses, like, especially I think it was that week 1 loss versus Duke that kind of like, you thought it was the sign of the times. Like, they're not going to fall to 6-6, I think, ever, especially in the ACC. But the turn, like, when you think of Clemson as an elite program where you're fearing them, like Bama, like Ohio State, Georgia, it's gone. I think it's gone.
Yeah, I feel like the game's gotten away from Dabo, and that the sport has a way of punishing those who refuse to change. You can look at it over and over again. It happens every time there's a major shift. When integration started kind of hitting, the teams in the Southeast Conference, teams like Texas, who were not following that, they suffered from that. They were horrible. When the wishbone was dying, teams like OU couldn't really run it anymore when you have fast linebackers. When the sport changes, you have to adapt with it. And Dabo flat out hasn't been able to adapt. And yeah, your recruiting's good, but the ability to fill in blanks, to cover holes, to improve that way, NIL is too important, and Clemson has the resources to do that, and they just choose not to. And I think that's, it's hubris, it's stubbornness, whatever it is. It's not working. And I agree, though. I'm not saying they're going to be like garbage. They're not going to be 6-6, but this is it. They've lost that edge where the best Clemson teams, what they did is they took care of business in the regular season. They don't do that anymore. Even though they, can win big games, they will fall to teams they shouldn't fall to. And, when it comes down to it, I think take their roster versus the rest of them, it's just not quite the same. That was always the big thing with Clemson is you could take pretty much an SEC type of roster into a playoff game and beat Alabama and compete with those teams. And they just don't have that. They've just kind of been outclassed right now with where college football is, and that's just kind of the case for me with Clemson.
And he's really like he's just one tick away. Like if he just turned the dial and put it one tick like to the left or whatever, he would be perfect. Like Nick Saban never was really in the portal, like getting like tons and tons of guys. Kirby Smart was never in the portal getting tons and tons of guys. So is Ohio State, but you just gotta fill those positions of need that it's like, even if you're adding a depth piece here or there, if you're adding like a big playmaker, like I remember Alabama going to get Jahmyr Gibbs, it's like, go out there, get a little bit of depth, and get maybe one difference maker. Like one. Like you don't have to, like we're not talking like these big programs. They don't have to have portal classes in the 15 pluses. They don't have to be chasing every guy out there. Like Clemson, the fortunate part is they're pretty good at talent evaluation and can get like good players out of high school. But it's just, they always have, I feel like, a position of need, and they just refuse to just go there and get one or two guys. Like you don't have to like sell your entire program where you're now splitting your 35 scholarships, half transfer portal, half high school recruiting. You just got to make minimal tweaks, and like that's what he's not willing to do. I think he thinks of himself like, if you go transfer portal, you have to be like Florida State, where you're filling immediate needs and just kind of balling out on the 3, 4, 5 big name guys that are in the portal. That's not what he has to be. He just has to fill just a few holes just to give him a little bit more depth here and there, and he'd be perfect. It's just we're getting to the point where guys are only going to transfer away and they're not bringing in anybody, and like that's never a good thing. Like you're never going to be able to out recruit that when you're losing at least 2-3 guys a year. Like they lost, I know they lost one of their, like he didn't perform well last year, but lost one of their former 5-star receivers to Notre Dame. It's like you got to find ways to fill that. He just refuses.
Yeah, that's just modern roster management for sure.
And like that's what made Nick Saban the best. He didn't like totally sell out to the trends in college football, but he adapted them and made them his own. And it's like you were talking about the wishbone. It's like when the spread offenses, and it became more of like Alabama used to be bad quarterback, just get a good line, get a running back behind there and go. He kind of realized it's like, hey, the teams that are beating us have good quarterbacks, spread offenses. He adapted to that. You just got to make minimal tweaks that it's like, yes, it does suck to go away from the original philosophy that was winning you things, but those tweaks do matter. It's like that's what extends these dynasties. Like that's what makes them truly like elite dynasties, if they're able to just make those small tweaks whenever things change.
Yep. He would always complain about it, but then do it better than everyone else out there.
Yeah,
that was the thing with Saban. And kudos on him for realizing you can't win national titles with Jacob Coker.
Yeah,
behind center.
You actually needed dynamic playmakers, like whether it be with their legs, with their arm, something behind there that can like make multiple reads and stuff like that. Like that was essential. You can't get, and like that's the thing when you look at Clemson, you can't get that lucky that they had two, besides Kelly Bryant, like being there for like a few games. You can't get that lucky with quarterbacks where you have Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, who are like both like good starters in the NFL consistently to like be your QB. So
yeah. Well, so we've talked about Clemson kind of as a macro, as a whole. How are we feeling about them this year? Because they start off with about as tough of a start as it gets, with a pretty solid neutral site game against Georgia in Atlanta. You have a pretty salty non-conference as well with App State that next week. And yeah, I mean, it's you got Citadel and South Carolina at the end, so two kind of lighter situations towards there. But overall, pretty tough start to the year because you also got NC State game 3, Florida State in game 5. Like, we're gonna find out who this Tiger team is pretty quick.
Yeah, I like that's my thing with Clemson this year. It's like I think they're kind of rooted in that third place spot in the ACC. Like I don't see them actually making the championship just because it feels like a little too much from last year. It's like last year was their defense was great, but Kate Klubnik and Garrett Riley coming in, like they could not get that offense going. I have a little bit more confidence this year. I think Garrett Riley is still a great OC. Like you saw what he did at SMU, you saw what he did at TCU with inferior talent and can like actually get it going. But Cade Klubnik, I know is going to develop a little bit, but he's a big question mark for me. It's like last year he had like 19 passing touchdowns, but had 19 potential turnovers. Like he had like 10 interceptions, 9 fumbles. Like they got some of those back, but he was basically for every touchdown he was turning it over. Like that has to cut back on it like drastically. And then when you look at their defense, it's like their defense was great last year. They lost 5, I believe, like 5 all ACC players from that defense to the draft. And this is where you see those transfer portal problems. It's like they do have a full defensive reload this year. They do have to fill that spot. I feel confident in it just because it seems like whoever's in that D coordinator position seems to do well at Clemson. Like they're able to have like a good defense even after they reload. But yeah, it's like even with the offense taking a few steps, plus like even if the defense is the same as they were last year, there's a lot of teams in the ACC that are really making big gains, and I just feel like they didn't make enough big games to like really cement them in that 1 or 2 spot that I feel very confident that they're going to be in Charlotte like come December.
For sure, it's no longer a given. That's for sure. Let's talk about one of those teams that has made some big games. That their championship window, their window of greatness. I feel like people have been waiting for this to open since 2000. 2003, the Miami Hurricanes. I feel like we've been down this road many times before, but I feel like for this iteration, the Mario Cristobal era in Miami, this has to be the time they finally start winning, right, Blake?
It has to. Like, it really has to. It's like everything that you hired Mario Cristobal to, like, be at this program has to culminate this year. Like, he now has 3 recruiting classes of elite talent. Like, that's the thing about Miami, that they have elite recruiting classes compared to the ACC. And they do not shy away from getting those big names in the portal. It's like last year it felt like one of their big deficiency was quarterback. It's Tyler Van Dyke was kind of he had a great freshman year and hasn't been good since. And they went out and bought big with Cam Ward. Like they probably paid him a lot of money not to go to the NFL. So it's like as a Miami fan, if you're not in the ACC championship this year, you probably have to put Mario Cristobal in the hot seat, if not fire him. Like he has had that much support, he's had that much money come into those recruiting classes, and they are like, this is the year. It's like when you have 3 like top 15 recruiting classes that come back to back to back, so you're filled at those positions, and then you get one of the best running backs from Oregon State. You get the, like, probably my favorite, like, transfer portal quarterback this year in Cam Ward. Like, Cam Ward, I think, put a lot, like, he covered a lot of those spots that were bad at Washington State and made them an actual competitive Pac-12 team. Like, I don't think Washington State, like, they had a lot of turmoil over the past few years with coaching changes, and it just seemed like the times had kind of passed them by, but Cam Ward was that good. So if Miami is not in Charlotte come December, Mario Cristobal has to go. It's like, it's that, I think, that crucial this year that they actually perform.
And not only that, it feels like an ACC ripe for the taking, with Florida State's, kind of golden run kind of being out. How many players they had graduate and go to the league. Clemson being down. This is Miami's time to go. They got to figure it out. And when you swing big on the portal, it's got to land. Just financially, fan interest wise, you have to hit it. And like you said, Cam Ward probably being slept on quite a bit by maybe some people who like maybe like, yeah, no, he's good, but the guy's a star. He is a damn good player that took Washington State to very, very high highs. As you mentioned, that Oregon State running back, I thought he was probably the best player on their offense last year over DJU. Pure electric.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is, and I think this is going to be a really excellent case study of how much a really good portal can transform your team. How can you have cohesiveness by swinging that big? And this is really the Miami, when NIL and all this kind of started, people pointed to Miami as being like, this could be something that gets you back on track. Well, let's see it. And I'm excited to see how they end up. Pretty salty, difficult, schedule overall. That opener at Florida should be very intriguing in Gainesville, but maybe not salty because they also have USF. That's at USF. That's not bad. That's not really anything. In addition to Ball State and Florida A&M, that's actually probably a pretty light schedule. I take it back.
It is light, but Florida's gonna come out punching. Like, that's the problem. Is like Billy Napier, you're going up against a coach that he is coaching for his job this year. Like, it is all on the line. So he's gonna come out firing. And it's going to be an interesting litmus case because it's like a lot of the college football media, a lot of the college football people around is like recruiting's the most important part. And that's what Mario Cristobal, that's why you hire him. But he like sucks. He really sucks. Look at the Georgia Tech game last year at in-game like actual coaching. And so it's the ultimate like Billy Napier kind of being feisty. Like, he's a more recruiting type, but I think gets his Florida teams up a little bit more. It's like Florida still, I feel like, fights even when they're really far down versus Mario Cristobal, who like can't seem to coach on game day. But it's a good litmus case of like, can these recruiting CEO coaches, that is like, he can get you those top 10 recruiting classes like almost every year, but can he, like, is that like the talent enough to actually prove results? Like, you can't go 7-6 like you did last year. Like, you have to improve on that heavily this year. So I'm very curious to see how Miami ends up.
For sure. I think it's one of the bigger questions in college football to keep an eye out on. So I'm intrigued to see how they end up. Let's move on to we've talked about some names you've seen a lot in the ACC. Let's talk about the new ones. Out of these teams, SMU, Cal, and Stanford, which one's going to end up doing the best? Not like mostly in this season, but in the long term. What do you think, Blake?
Yeah, I think this one's probably easy, and it hates for me to say this, but SMU. It's like when you kind of look at these three editions, that's why, like, honestly, they prompted lawsuits. It's like you took a G5 school who had kind of been overlooked by every major conference when expanding, and I don't think that's because, like, SMU's a bad program and, like, they don't invest in it. We've seen they've raised $100 million. They're renovating their stadium. Like, they're trying to take this seriously, but it seems like Cal and Stanford are just kind of sitting there waiting for whatever college football has for them next, of like, can we please make this club sports if we're not going to take this seriously? Because
they're trying to quiet quit. They're trying to quiet quit college sports.
Once the transfer portal happened, like, Cal was always kind of out of it. Stanford was like the only one that was actually able to recruit like these like good 5 stars. Like, usually they could go with the academic angle and stuff like that. Like, they had some good angles there, but those are now gone when you can still get like good academic programs and they'll pay you millions of dollars to go there each year. And Stanford's just like, here's like a partial ride with some financial aid and stuff like that. Like, it just doesn't work anymore in this era. So It has to be SMU just because I think the other two have given up. Like they just are ready for whether they can become independents, whether they can just go on and do something else besides invest in college football. Like I feel like they just want to they want everything to break away so they can just invest in their Olympic sports and be happy and be like the best water polo team and diving teams and stuff like that. Like they just feel like they are dead men walking type programs that they just don't want to invest anymore.
Yeah, they probably already have their invitations to the West Coast Conference written up
Yep.
and ready to go.
They just wanted the Pac-12 to be able to like compete in their other random sports like close by. Like that's I think the biggest kicker for them is like, dang, we're gonna have to spend all this money to fly our swimming team out like across country and now go like against people and like probably dominate them. But it's they don't want to be in football anymore. Like after Jim Harbaugh, I felt like that, and then David Shaw, kind of in the final years. Like I think David Shaw was a great coach. I think he like could easily have a career again, but I think after that they just kind of hung it up and were just there. Like they've kind of Stanford was the last bastion on the like Northern California West Coast of actually trying to compete in football, and they've just given up. They don't really care.
Yeah. I mean, they gave it a good run. There are some
Yeah.
damn stars who came to Stanford, but I feel like as college football moves away from being about academics,
Yeah.
that's just a harder sell. That's just a harder sell, because
Because they had the lockdown on I feel like every good offensive tackle, quarterback, tight end, wide receiver that like actually somewhat cared about academics. Like I felt like Stanford every year when you would look at the top 50 players, they would have one of the top 50 just because they like still cared about academics. But now people have kind of like seen through the veil and it's like you're not really as a college athlete probably getting the same college education as everybody else. Like you're busy doing football things, and once that kind of faded away, it's just there's no use of trying to invest in it.
yeah, you're not there to play school. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. I'm still dubious about how good overall SMU will end up
Same.
in the conference. Um, because look, I get that the donors are trying to offset the loss of your TV revenue. That's just it's too long, and the ACC is in too much.
Flux.
Who knows that I don't see it panning out, no matter how many gold Trans Ams you give out.
It's so like that's my thing with SMU is it's they don't like they always talk about donor support and they do have a lot of donor support, but it's like that donor support never leads to actual fans coming to the stadium. It's like it's the comparable one is across the way with TCU. Like for me, it's TCU in its highest of highs was ever the games were packed. Everybody's going. Like even in those Mountain West days, like everybody wanted to go see the Horned Frogs when they're at their top. Last year when we saw SMU like at home, like they're still not selling out their home arena even though they had a historic season compared to like the last 30 years. It was like their best season since the 80s, and it's still they just struggle to get fans in the actual stands. It's like they have a great tailgating, like they have a great tailgating atmosphere, they have great donor support, but that feels like where all the fans want to stay. They either want to sign their checks or they want to just like sit at their tailgates and watch the game and watch other games, and like that's fine, but it's just hard to become one of those elite programs, and we've seen it kind of with Miami. Like it's hard to become an elite program whenever your stands are completely empty and opposing teams now being in Dallas in the ACC is going to be an easy one to get to. So I worry about that for them. That it's like it could easily end up being the Vanderbilt situation where everybody in the SEC is like, "Oh, I'd love to have a weekend in Nevada," or so, not Nevada. Sorry, Nevada on the mind with my NCAA franchise, but I'd love to have a like weekend in Tennessee and enjoy the city and go to the game and stuff like that. So I worry like if they can't get that fan support thing, it's just they're gonna be all right in the sense of making bowls and being better than they have been the last 30 years, but with that amount of investment they want to see themselves get a lot bigger, like they're competing for ACC championships every year.
And I feel like fan support will improve when you are playing Florida
Yeah.
State and even like Pitt. and like some of
Like
those upper.
recognizable programs, like not the American.
Yeah, that's more exciting than even the best like Tulane and Temple, being your weekly schedule. It's got to be a boost, and I feel like it it has when you're in, especially when you're in the Dallas market, when everything's big and you have so many options. Like it's hard to not feel like those games don't matter when you're in the American. So I think the ACC at least gives you a semblance of excitement. So we'll see how it pans out for SMU. I'm intrigued to see how it goes for them.
The stadium has to improve. It has
In
to
Gerald
improve.
Ford,
Like it's so bad. It's like it's probably on my list now. Now that they're Power Five, or Power Four, sorry, one of the worst Power Four stadiums. It's really bad. It's
it's
like
got to be.
it's just like a single loop bowl with like horrible, because they don't have fans that come there, that anytime the game's packed, like concession stands employees don't know how to act and get through lines quickly. Like they don't have enough water, they don't have enough beer, they don't have, like, it seems like every time a stadium actually gets packed there, they get sold out of stuff, the ticket lines are long. Like they seem to not know how to deal with those like big game environments just yet.
Well, we'll see how it goes. I'm sure they'll get a couple big ones. Florida State coming to town. So we'll see how that goes for SMU. All right, let's move to a topic I think you and I like talking about a lot, the dark horses. So we've talked about how this is kind of a wide open conference. And for me, whenever it's wide open, this is a perfect time for a team to maybe swoop in. Now, we haven't really seen an ACC champion break free of that Clemson Florida State mold in a while. But for you, who do you think has the best chance of maybe swooping up and making a run at, possibly unseating a Florida State or a Clemson?
Yeah, there's probably two teams that are going to be like biting at the heels this year. First, I feel like this is every year. Everybody's like NC State, dark horse. We've seen this many of times. And I feel like NC State has had a lot of good teams, but like the rare, I think, while Dave Doran has been there, like I don't think he's eclipsed 10 wins just yet. It feels like it's so close and they can just never get it, but they're always there. And this year it feels like they're going to have a great defense. They have the star wide receiver, what was it, Casey Concepcion, like an absolute speed demon in the video game too, if you need a fun receiver to play with. But they basically, it feels like, brings everybody back. They had a great recruiting class, great transfer portal class, and then they bring in Grayson McCall. That, like, Grayson McCall has been a namesake here. I feel like we've been talking about him for, feels like 4 or 5 years now. Like, he made Coastal Carolina, like, relevant, and the reason why we even talk about the teal turf, like, ever on the show is because of him.
Teal chickens.
The teal chickens, and they bring in him compared to like last year, the revolving door. Like they brought in Brennan Armstrong and he like really sucked for him. Like just did not do well. And Grayson McCall, like I think there's going to be some struggles going to the Power 5 a little bit, just like the up in competition, but you have to think he's like they are there knocking at the doorsteps. Like they in a weird way similar to Miami, it's like they kind of have their dream lineup compared to what they usually get. So they need to actually go out, like even if they don't, like I don't feel like the pressure is there that it's like if you don't make the ACC championship, you're good. But 10 wins, like you have to be shooting for 10 wins. And then the other team I had on there, or you can go into.
I did want to
NC
note
State.
on NC State. I really like McCall. It's going to be a very tough start for them. They have Tennessee in a neutral site game week 2. You got to go to Clemson. But overall, like after that, it's pretty manageable. It's which I feel like to me NC State is at their best whenever they have teams to like kind of sneak out in the corner and jump on them. Like they're a really good like upset type of team. So if they can stay focused and like win the games they're supposed to win and not get upset, I could see them making a run at making Charlotte here.
Because if they legitimately go 4-1, like at the end of September, they are well on their way. Like they just gotta wrap up everything. It really comes down to probably that Clemson game. It's like if they beat Clemson at Clemson, like you have probably punched your ticket and shown it. Like, the Tennessee game is more of probably a litmus test for how they are nationally. They're probably, like, in my mind, they're probably going to lose that game, but they could keep it close. But, like, if they beat Clemson, they have, just looking at their schedule, absolutely nobody, like, on the back half. It's like North Carolina's your next best game, and you're home free.
Well, and I mean, I don't want to simplify it, but if you really think about it, Blake, if let's say they lose to Tennessee, lose to Clemson, all they have to really do is run the table. You're probably in the ACC championship with one loss.
Yep. Somebody's going to
You just have to win the
like
ACC championship and you're in the playoff. Like, NC State might have one of the best paths to the playoff in college football, maybe? I know that's a hot take, but you know, if you lose the two obvious games you lose, you just have to take out Western Carolina, La Tech, Northern Illinois, Wake Forest, Syracuse, Cal, Stanford, Duke, Georgia Tech, UNC. And that's if you like cannot split between Tennessee and UNC. So wipe them out and then get one lucky night in Charlotte and you're in.
They just need that. They need that. I feel like where they always struggle is they'll play really good against the good opponents, but then lose to some random bad one. It's like, just take out, all you need this year is not really even beat the best. You just gotta beat the worst. Like, just beat the teams that you're better than, and then even if you can't, like, even if you get blown out by Tennessee, blown out by Clemson, you are in a very good spot. You are in a very good spot come December.
Yeah, that's going to be intriguing to see what the Wolfpack do. Who else do you have as a dark horse, Blake?
Yeah, so Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech kind of checks the boxes for me. It's like schedule plus they just seem like they're going in the right direction. Kyron Drones, their quarterback, a former Baylor transfer, like, he is electric on his feet. Like, he is setting close to near records at Virginia Tech. The only other person that eclipses him is Michael Vick when it comes to rushing the ball. It feels like Brent Pry actually has Virginia Tech back on track. The only thing I worry about, like, I think they have a solid defense going into the season, like, probably going to be top 25, a good offense, like, good running game there. It's just Kyron Drones. Can he actually, like, last year, I think he was like 21% on deep passes. It's like, it's stuff like that where it's like their offense can get a little too vanilla in the sense that they can only do stuff, they can only work the short and the run game. Like, you can kind of stack the box against them and be just fine. But you just hope that they're able to take the jump this year. And when you talk about schedules, like, talk about just a glorious, glorious schedule. It's like you do have to play at Miami, but, like, if you're going to have a road game versus the top 3-4 of it, you're like, you would love Miami just because, like, their home field isn't as great. And then you got Clemson at home. You really dictate your path here to the ACC championship, that if you can take one or two of those games, you're looking really good come December, because I think they just play like, they played the bummiest of bums at the end. It's just Stanford, Boston College, Georgia Tech, Duke, Virginia. Like, you can clean up on those programs. Like, those are probably going to be 5 or 6 of the worst ACC programs. So if Kyron Drones takes the leap this year, can throw kind of to the middle of the field, to the deep ball just a little bit better, you're sitting pretty good with that schedule.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty light, and it depends. I mean, it depends on how Clemson does as well. Having Clemson on that schedule, a little tricky, but I mean, Pry said at media days he expects to make the conference championship, and if he doesn't, he'll be disappointed. So they're optimistic in Blacksburg for the first time in a really, really long time.
It's wild, like, reading the stats. Virginia Tech won 10 plus games 8 straight years from 2004 to 2011, and then didn't, like, only had 1 year in the last 12 years since then. Like, that's insane. It was like Virginia Tech was on top of the world. Like, Beamer, like, got them it's one of those underrated, I feel like, best coaches, just because it's like Virginia Tech never reached the highest of high of winning the national championship or like really competing, like going to one at that, but like really elevated that program similar to gosh, who is South Carolina's coach, Florida coach,
Spurrier.
Spurrier. Like Spurrier got like the best out of South Carolina, like he got the best out of Virginia Tech. So if like Pry can tap into a little bit of that, it's like Virginia Tech's gonna be deadly this year.
Yeah, and I like you said, they've been trending the right way. I think Drones is going to be damn good. He's fun to play with in the college football game, by the way. Very fun.
The amount of like former Baylor quarterbacks that are like throughout the league is insane. It's like Bohannon's now in BYU and he's their starting quarterback. It's Zeno is the starting quarterback for UAB. Drones is the starting quarterback for Virginia Tech. Blake Shapen is the starting quarterback for Mississippi State. It's like Baylor's had some insane QB recruiting, like maybe not the elite guys, but the guys that can definitely find a starting spot like throughout college football and just haven't been able to get like one of their own. So it's just like it's funny to see the dispersion of Baylor quarterbacks now out there.
I mean, it reminds me of when Texas A&M had Kyler, who went to OU, and then I'm blanking on the guy who replaced Kyler. It was Kyle something. I know this is a bad example, but he ended up like starting a couple games in the NFL.
Yeah.
I know we have A&M listeners, and they're like, "What are you doing?" You know this answer, but yeah. Anyways, so I had a dark horse I'd been thinking about, which I've really liked this program, and I really like the coach, Louisville. Jeff Brom, love the direction of him, and I feel like all throughout last year, through some of Louisville's struggles, we said that next year would be the year. They turned out to be great, but look, this schedule, hellish. Louisville, I feel
they had such a generous one last year that was able to get them to the ACC championship, and now they're like having to pay for it big time.
Yeah, it's and I know sometimes Ty's like, oh, we just read schedules on these previews, but I mean, Jacksonville State, salty non-conference. You have to deal with at Notre Dame. You have to deal with Miami, at Clemson, at Kentucky. Like, that's just brutal. Like, that is brutal. So maybe Louisville probably doesn't get there. like I might have thought they would. In fact, I kind of had them as an ACC champion type of team. But one glance at that schedule, and I quickly scratched them off that. So
it is hard because it's like they do return a lot on defense. Like I know they're probably going to be a top 25 defense when it's said and done. Like that was I thought like their secret bread and butter last year was they in those like possessions where it's really like your third downs, your red zones and stuff, like they're kind of a bend don't break type defense, and like in the best way. It's like I don't care what you do on first and second down, but if you can get them off the field, like that's all that matters. And they were really really good at that. But with Louisville, it's the hard part is so like Jeff Brom is probably one of the top. I'd probably put him top 2 or 3 like actual coaches, like game day coaches you want on your sideline, because like you saw what he did at Purdue. Like he made Purdue like the spoiler makers. Like Purdue has no business after he's left. Like they suck. Like they really really suck at football, and like that should show everything. Like Louisville wanted Jeff Brom for the longest time, not only with that like alma mater connection, but like he's a really good, just like can elevate your roster type football coach. But they went from Jack Plummer. Like Jack Plummer was he's just a guy. Like he wasn't a great quarterback, not a bad quarterback. They got Baron Morton. For Schooner Pod listeners, they're probably familiar with him from Texas Tech, but I just worry about like Baron Morton. The one thing is injuries. It's like one of those famous Texas Tech quarterbacks that are just like you see the potential there and they can never reach it because they're always injured. And he's like I think in the spring wasn't able to actually play because he was injured. Like this guy just can't seem to escape the medical room like at the facility. So it's like if he's playing like and even at just like a slightly better version of Jack Plummer, like you're going to get about the same, if not better, Louisville team. But like you said, it's the thing that flips on them, the schedule. The schedule flips bad on them. Last year, I think we locked in maybe on this podcast, like Louisville was one of our favorite win totals because it was one of the easy ones that they're going to win about 8 or 9 of these games. They're going to lose all these other ones. They are so much worse than these programs that they're going against, but they're also so much better than all these other ones.
And they don't get the benefit.
Yeah. And they flipped a couple too. Like they made it easy sailing. But like this year, it's just when you're looking at probably like win totals wise, you got to play, like you said, Miami, you got to play Clemson, you got to play out of conference at Kentucky, who's always a hard one. And then you get at home like SMU, who could be, like many are calling, like the darling that could come out of nowhere of the ACC. So like they're probably playing 3 of the top 7 or 8 teams right there, which you don't want to see in these big like 16, 17 team conferences, like that you're playing like some of the cream of the crop. So yeah, it's really Louisville has the talent to be there, but it's like Virginia Tech and NC State get that they only play one of the top dogs, or if they play 2 of the top dogs, they play one of them at home and one of them at a beneficial. Here, no, you get Miami at home, which you would probably rather play at Miami versus at Clemson. You know, you'd rather have Clemson at home and then go down to Coral Gables, or not even Coral Gables, it's Miami, but go
Miami
down to
Gardens.
Miami.
Not even Miami. It's
Miami Gardens, and actually play them. So they
total mess.
They got a tough pull for the schedule.
For sure. Yeah, it's a tough go, but it all balances itself out in the long haul, I suppose. But overall, I really like the projection or trajectory of their program. But yeah. Before we get on to our props, any other dark horses, any other teams you would like to discuss from the ACC that we have not touched on?
We touched on SMU a little bit. I feel like the cutting line probably is around like North Carolina area.
I think Mac Brown, he's got to be done, right? Like I feel like he's done all he can at UNC. I think it's just kind of over.
He's just kind of mashing the buttons when it comes to defensive coordinator. And like the problem is like they had 2 good NFL talents at quarterback like while he's been there, and now they don't have that, and they're trying to solve that plus the defense now. It feels like too much of a rebuild for him. That like they've been fortunate enough that they've had very, very, very good quarterback play over the last few years that have been able to kind of like mask some of their defensive warts. And I think their defense is going to be better, but not that much better that it's going to really like lift this team up.
Yeah. No, they're gonna just kind of float right at the middle, and at some point with UNC, you have to ask yourself how far you want to go. And if you're Mac Brown, you have to ask yourself how much do you want to just kind of keep getting, Tar Heel blue paychecks. Yeah. So we'll see how that goes.
He'll take him to a bowl every year. Like he's a great coach that will never bottom. Like he'll never bottom him out. Like he's always trying. But he had Sam Howell and Drake May there. Like that. Regardless of what you think of them as NFL prospects, if you have an NFL prospect as a quarterback, like while you were coaching there, your team's going to be pretty good. And I just can't see they don't have that anymore. And even if like the defense like even gets to league average at this point, it just still doesn't save them.
Yep, for sure. All right, let's move on to one of our favorite parts. No, this is probably our favorite part of the previews. Our win total props and our conference championship props. So we're going to start with win total. And we're both feeling a little negative here, Blake. I'll let you kick us off here. Who do you like?
Yep. So I'm going under 8.5 wins on the SMU Mustangs. And this is just like, not only is it kind of like as a vengeful, like I like it as a TCU fan, but it's just kind of rooted in data at this point. Whenever these programs come from the G5 and jump up to a P5 conference, even when they are electric hot coming into these, They just can't. The lack of recruiting that you've had over your entire time, those rosters are not ready to compete with P5 rosters week in and week out. And I've kind of seen that with, like, I'll see that with SMU. Like, I saw it with Cincinnati, U of H, even UCF. Like, UCF was one of the hottest G5 teams out there. Like, even my program, TCU, it's like when we jumped up to the Big 12, the first 2 years were like, yeah, we were in games and like had some close games and like there with like even some of the best, like with RG3, like whenever he was playing. And I'm not saying you just like bottom out completely, but it's just hard to go from, okay, we only have to win 3 or 4 games a year where we're actually tested and then coast the rest, to, oh, these guys are actually going to give us a fight every single week, week out, week in, week out. And that's my thing with SMU. It's like looking at the schedule right here, it's they have a pretty soft first 2 games. Like they're going to beat Nevada, they're going to beat Houston Christian, but then you do BYU at home. Like BYU's not a fantastic Big 12 team, but they're feisty. Like we saw them last year. Like they kind of stick around, and then they play TCU in a rivalry game. And like TCU last year, like just more support of why I'm going under here. SMU had one of their best seasons since the 80s last year, probably the best season, and they still lost to a OU team that felt very underwhelming and probably one of their worst since like the 2000s. They lost to a TCU team that was really bad, like didn't even make a bowl game, but still like crushed them, both crushed them by 17 points. And then you go to a bowl game versus Boston College, who is in your now conference, and they are considered like probably the mid of the bottom. Like they are the middle of like the bottom tier, and like still beat them. And I know it's a bowl game, but you got to look at these things. It's like, it seems like every time SMU has gone against legitimate competition over the last 5 years, they just can't seem to win. They couldn't do it under Sonny Dykes. They haven't been able to do it under Rhett Lashley. So I'm seeing probably at least a loss or two on that non-conference schedule, and then when you play like the likes of Florida State, you're probably going to lose to Louisville, who we talked about, that's feisty. Like, they have an easy ACC schedule, which is why they're kind of like the over darlings this year. Maybe even people are putting a future on them to make the ACC tournament or even win it, just so they can hedge out at the end. But when I look at this, it's like, sure, I can see 3 losses here pretty clearly, and I just need a fourth of them struggling versus one of these. They played the bottom tier. Like I'm not gonna lie, they played the bottom tier. Like after Louisville, Stanford, Duke, Pittsburgh, Boston College, Virginia, and California. Like you can't get any of the worst of the ACC teams, but I feel like they'll struggle with at least one. And so
because it's still the ACC.
Yeah,
It's still a step up. Like I feel like last year, especially in the Big 12, we were just slamming the other teams. Whenever the new 4 came in, the safe bet was always just bet against them.
Yeah.
Fade them constantly, and it kept working over and over and over again. And it does for a reason, because it takes time to adapt. And I mean, you highlighted it right there. Both that SMU game and the Boston College game were so illuminating to me that this team was not ready for next level competition. They just clearly showed that they weren't. And unless there is a great amount of improvement, I just don't see it. I don't see a 9-win season. That's just, I think that I don't see where the odds makers are at that. I
think it's public perception. They have a really easy schedule. Like once they kind of clear their first half, they're going to be favorites in every single game. After that, it's hard. Like you're not playing Charlotte anymore. Like Charlotte has like, whether like people will actually buy into the program or not. Like Boston College, although they're not good, they still kind of give a damn. Like they still give a damn whenever it comes to actual gameplay. Even like Stanford and Cal can be feisty there. Like we saw Stanford last year, they beat Colorado. Cal always seems to, like, Cal made a bowl game. Like these teams are bottoming out, but when it comes to game day, they actually still somewhat care. And it's just the difference. It's like even the bad P5 teams, it's the difference between going against them and your really bad American teams, where last year, like, that was the thing about SMU. Everybody was on their over because they played nobody in the American last year. It's not like they played Memphis, but it wasn't like they were playing Tulane. It wasn't like they were playing UTSA. Like they were getting some of the best tests of the conference. They kind of were able to coast by because of the fact that they played the absolute nobodies of the American Conference. Now they played the nobodies of the ACC, but I just don't see they're gonna slip up one or two times. Like it's not gonna be a bottoming out season. Like they're gonna make a bowl game for sure, but it's just gonna be they're gonna slip up one or two times here or there.
Right. The perils are just tougher, because those teams in the American they're just dead in the water. So yeah, I agree with you there. For my pick, I'm going Clemson under 9.5 wins at -160. Not the best value, but I feel like this is a lock to me. Because I feel like they're going to lose to Georgia game 1, and I think they're going to lose at Florida State as well. I think those I'm very comfortable saying those are going to be losses. Now, in addition to that, you have App State, NC State, Wake Forest. Not very good. I don't believe Wake's very good, but always tricky on the road. You have to go to Blacksburg against Vatech. We always know what a snake pit that Pittsburgh can be. That's always a trap there. You have Louisville. Like I just don't buy that, one, they can beat those two teams, and two, that they can avoid getting just trapped by situations that I think they very losable situations for Clemson. I don't think they're consistent enough in their current form to avoid an upset, in addition to losing to teams they should lose to.
They have a really hard non-conference already because you're always going to schedule South Carolina, which what you think about South Carolina, they're still a very competitive team. Like they're going to try to beat you. Like there's fight there. Like Georgia, I think is a guaranteed loss. I agree with you. And I just love everything we've talked about in this podcast of all these underdogs and stuff like that. Besides Miami, they're playing every one of the potential contenders that we thought about. We thought we loved Virginia Tech. We loved NC State. They're playing both of them. Even Louisville, who were it's kind of on the fence. They're right there. There's just too much there of teams that were the teams behind them, if they reach their potential, they could make the ACC championship. And especially since all these teams have a common data point against Clemson, they have to show up for that game. If you're gonna go in with at least a loss or maybe even two to the ACC championship, you got to beat Clemson in order to win some of those tiebreakers. So I like that. I like that a lot.
And Clemson just constantly narrowly gets wins. They always have done this. And it happens more and more often, and I don't know, don't trust them. I don't trust that. So okay, so both we're fading Clemson, fading SMU. Let's go on to our conference championship predictions. I'm going a little bit bold here, Blake. I said it earlier, I think the NC State Wolfpack have one of the easiest paths to the college football playoff. Even if they lose to Clemson, all they have to do is just take care of business. You're in the ACC championship. And at that point, I like your odds against, I don't want to say anyone, but I think they have a puncher's chance against anyone in the ACC. So I've already got half of the hard part done of getting them to Charlotte. I feel like that is as locky as a lock gets. So NC State in Charlotte, at that point, it's a coin toss. And I kind of like it. I kind of like my odds with that. They're a bit of a long shot here. I think they're around plus 400, I believe. Maybe a little bit more. I need to check DraftKings Sportsbook on that, but you're getting really good odds on it. And this isn't a value prediction exactly, but the fact that NC State can get to that final relatively easy, I like it. They're my pick. I don't know if they're the best team, but all you have to do is be the best team on that day in December.
Yep. That really all it is. And that's why my pick, I went sadly, I had to do it, but I have to just trust what people are telling me. I went with Miami. Miami's either gonna be clear in this or clear not in this. And I think it's gonna be spectacular one way or the other. But the roster, like looking at the rosters, if you just put them side by side, they're so much better than everybody else in the ACC right now. Like, I don't even think it comes close. Every single position, like, I feel so comfortable with Miami there. This will be like, it's a boomer bust. Like, I have them as my champion. I'm afraid to put actual money on them just because, like, if it explodes, it's not gonna be like, oh, they stumbled one or two times here but are able to like sneak their way in and give me a chance. No, like, if they implode, it's gonna be really bad and they're gonna lose 3-4 games and it's like Mario Cristobal's probably done. But we talked about it, like Cam Ward, the running game, the defense. They brought in the coordinators. Like, it feels like everything is building to this year. Even without it, still worries me. Like, zero home field advantage. It feels like ever. Like, even at best, it's a neutral site. That always worries me with Miami. But I just think roster wise, we're gonna see them. We're gonna see them come December, and then after that, who knows? But I just feel like this is the boomer bust year. Like, that's, we rarely get that in college football, but it is a true boomer bust year for Miami.
No, it's just got to be the year they figure it out. And I personally wouldn't put money on it either, just because I feel like so many times it's like, this is the time Miami's going to work. Oh, no, they don't. It's like throwing your money into a chipping mill because Miami's going to find a way to let you down. They like Texas in a way in previous years. Just, I don't know. Then again, Texas found a way out last year, so you never know. But all right, there it is. NC State, Miami. Might actually be a matchup. You never know. But yeah, Blake, that's the ACC. I think it'll be a very interesting honestly really interesting conference that I think is being slept on a bit.
It is. The off-season turmoil, whether Clemson or Florida State is going to leave, as definitely like jaded what this conference actually is. Like, when I stack it up, it's the whole who's in the Power 3 debate versus them or the Big 12. They have a good case this year. Like, they're not as deep as, say, the Big 12, but they have some heavy hitters. Like, we talked about those like top teams. It's like you could easily see a situation where Clemson, Miami, Florida State, NC State, Virginia Tech, and Louisville are probably all ranked at once. Like, they're gonna get a lot of teams. Like, this conference is built to get a lot of teams in those first few spots just because they do kind of have that back half of the conference that are a little bit of fodder that you can pad those records with. Like, it's a difficult conference like any power conference, but I wouldn't say it's like you're scared about going to play Houston or Cincinnati or somebody that like actually seems to be a little bit more on the feisty end. But they're probably going to have like 5 teams ranked consistently this entire year just because of how their schedules work out.
How many teams do you think get into the 12-team playoff?
I think
obviously one, but
one. I think they get 2. I think they get 2 because I can easily the odds-on favorite scenario of Miami and Florida State meeting up in the championship. If you get that, and it's a 1 or maybe even 2 loss, like Florida State and Miami wins, like I said, I think Florida State has that trump card on the committee right now that it's like, hey, if they're anywhere close, it's still healthy. You gotta hand them a bone after what you like did to them last year. Like, last year was some of the most inexcusable. I don't care what you think they were then. The game has always been about what happens on the field. Like, for my entire life, that if you're undefeated, you're getting a shot at the national championship in one form or another. So I feel like this one, like, that's where I think the ACC right now currently edges out on like who's the third best conference. Like, if you're looking at playoffs, I think they have the best chance of getting 2 compared to the Big 12.
I think it's going to be interesting. I do agree. I think they probably have a better chance of getting 2 than the Big 12 does. I think the non-conference strength that they've had, which they bragged about, they have the
they had the banner.
The banner, toughest non-conference in the country.
Like,
so
is
they
that
have
a flex or not a flex? Like, it's not even like the toughest conference schedule. Like,
it's like we're really good at playing other teams. Like, that's, I don't know, very odd.
The ACC is king of like your Clemson Georgia's Clemson's gonna get blown out, but they'll get enough in the numbers on the back half that it's like they'll play like, oh, Cincinnati Pittsburgh or whatever, and Pittsburgh wins, and like they get enough on that back end of like we have the most Power 5 wins in all of like non-conference. Like they backfill very good with some of their bottom teams, beating some of like the other bottom teams around the nation of power conference teams.
Vautech at Vandy is one this year. So like they fill in with these little crud ones. You know, like Syracuse will beat like some rando, you know, some bad Big Ten team, you know, Maryland.
Maryland or Rutgers, and you're like, yeah, like
add them to the stack, boys. No, I'm gonna go with 2. I think I think in addition to the non-conference, it's just diluted enough where a lot of those top teams don't cannibalize each other. Yeah. That I could see 2. I could see 2 here with the ACC. So
yeah, your dream if you're Jim Phillips sitting there, like you hope that like Miami's undefeated, NC State comes in, beats them, and it's like a 10-2 or I guess 11-2 team at that time, and like NC State gets the automatic bid, and you have somebody there that was 1 loss or undefeated going into the conference championship and can't be denied. And I think this year too, like I don't know where the committee's going to go with it, but I don't think they can go like full kind of like rigged mode yet of letting just like only SEC and Big Ten teams in. Like if that happens the first year, granted, if it happens because all the other teams are bad, then fine. But if it's like there's a 10-2 like Florida State program versus like a 9-3, like who, like Missouri or something, like you gotta just like push the chips a little bit the other way to make it seem a little bit more balanced and fair.
For sure. For sure. And it's good. That's going to be so interesting to see how all of that shakes out. Because I think we'll have Ben Steelers, and it's going to get interesting. Like at NC State, like hypothetically, you know, and I guess we are going to have to do our playoff. You know, it's more interesting now with 12. NC State's a top 4 seed for me in my playoff.
That's the thing. I'm like, the 4 seeds are not who you think the 4, like, that's going to be the rewiring. It's not the 4 best teams. It's just who do you think are going to win their conference games and then actually get one in. It's like, I was watching Pate the other day and he put Georgia like 9 or 10, but it kind of makes sense. You're like, if you don't think Georgia makes it to the SEC championship game, then they're probably going to fall in like that range, like based on their record. It's just, you kind of have to make some of those executive decisions that, there's going to be teams that are way better that are falling in the 6-7 range versus who's actually in the top 4.
Oh, for sure. Well, Blake, thank you for coming on as always. Looking forward to breaking down more of these conferences as we march closer to kickoff. We're reaching within a month here, so I'm very excited. You and I know we'll be breaking down some of the. I keep trying to retrain my brain because it's not really group of 5 anymore.
5, yeah. I don't know what to call them. Yeah, because there's still 5 of them, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the group of well, unless it depends on what you think the Pac-12 is. You know,
that's true.
It's a group of 5 plus 2 extra teams.
Some extras.
But we'll be breaking that down. Next week we'll be talking some Big Ten football with some combination of the group of our Weekend Spread group, and then we'll be doing more in-depth, long-form deep dive pods on not only the SEC. First deep dive we're having on that with OU joining the conference, but we'll also do the Big 12 as well because look, we still know a lot about it. Got to stick to our roots a little bit. We're not going to ignore what is still a very important conference to us and an important conference to the region that we're covering. So I think the Weekend Spread, it's going to take on a different form in a way, just given, you know, it used to be all Big 12. It's going to be like kind of an amalgam of Big 12 and SEC and big games. And it's going to be fun, but I think we're going to always try to keep it to our region. So we'll be paying tribute there with our deep dive Big 12 like we always do. So should be fun.
Oh, it's going to be a great time. I'm excited for the new dawn of the weekend spread because I feel like it's going to evolve in a great place where some of those Big 12 matchups that we would go deep dive into week 6 and they really had no implications, we can kind of shave off some of those and put in some of those good SEC matchups and one that matters there. So I feel like we'll have the ability to cover two conferences kind of at once and cover all the main storylines, the big stuff, the big games week to week, and we also still have that knowledge. Like, I'm glad y'all, even going to the SEC, you've learned so much even about some of the new joiners and some of these random other teams that have joined. It's like you really have a great knowledge of 35 of the 60, 70 something power conference teams. Like, can't ignore that.
Yeah, it's a big chunk now. That is a big chunk of college football, to say the least. So I'm excited. I'm excited about it. It'll be fun. It'll make the games and the picks much bigger as we enter year 7 of picking college football games. Blake, that's hard to believe. This will be our 7th season, dating back to the old written days in 2018 to now. So should be fun. But cool. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us as we preview the ACC. We'll be back next week with the Big Ten. Until then, good luck out there, everyone.